Castlevania Symphony of the Night is one of the most revered games of all time. It stands toe-to-toe with Super Metroid as the best in its genre, and has evolved from a cult classic into a cultural mainstay. And I've never played it. Welcome back to Late to the Game, a series where I play the best games of all time for the first time. And I discuss my thoughts before, during, and after playing the game for the very first time. This time I'm going to be playing a game that I wanted to play for quite a long time now, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And just like I did with Resident Evil, I'm going to begin with a discussion of my history with the series. My first experience with Castlevania wasn't actually through any of the games. It was James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, his video retrospective on Castlevania. That's now about a decade ago at this point. Man, time flies. But anyway, in that video he discussed, went through his personal history with the Castlevania series, and I never knew about this series up to that point, so it was really interesting to learn about it. It was a very funny video, but at the same time it kind of put me off playing Castlevania because he talked about mostly the difficulty of the games, so that kind of intimidated me a little bit. And my first experience actually playing one of the games was a few years after that. I was in college, and there was a game room on campus at the Student Union, which was near where all of the classroom buildings were. And I had about an hour and a half to 2 hour break between two of my classes, to the point where it would be useless to walk back all the way back to my freshman dorm, sit for about 10 or so minutes, and then head back the other way. So I went to the game room occasionally, and the Xbox there had Symphony of the Night. I played the intro and did a little bit of exploring before I died for the first time, and then was just like, I want to see what else they have. So I played most of my time at that game room that semester was playing Katamari and Burnout Paradise and Grand Theft Auto 4. So years later, I would get into Castlevania via the Netflix series, which is amazing, by the way. It's my favorite show on right now, pretty much. And I absolutely loved it. So before Season 2 came out, I wanted to get back in the mood for Castlevania, so I emulated the first game. And because I emulated it, I used save states to get past all the notoriously hard sections. So yeah, I know it doesn't really count, but I still had a great time with it, so this will pretty much more or less be my first official experience with a Castlevania game. Alright, so before I play, I want to lay out everything that I know about Symphony of the Night before going in, including things that might be wrong. These are just how I think the game will end up being, based on what I picked up through osmosis and through other means. So, alright, this is everything I know about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Pull up a list here. I know it was a huge shift for the series from 2D action platformers to more of a Metroid style, to a point where the entire genre now is called Metroidvania because of the success of both Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night around the similar time. Kind of like how Soulsborne now is used to describe games of that particular style. I played a few of these Metroidvania type games, including the Game Boy Advance Metroid, Batman Arkham Asylum, and Axiom Verge, just to name a few. So I more or less know what to expect here in terms of structure. I know you start the game as Richter, in a recreation of the end of Rondo of Blood, and I know there's some spectacular voice acting here. What is a man? And I know that Richter kills Dracula at the end of the intro. We cut 2 years later and you play as Alucard, Dracula's son, who wants revenge against Dracula. Dracula was resurrected by a dark wizard named Shaft. Death, a henchman of Dracula, steals your weapons and powers, and you start from scratch with weak weapons and have to search the castle and upgrade yourself before you're strong enough to take on Dracula. And that's more or less the structure of the game. I know you fight Richter at some point in the story. And I know the big spoiler, the halfway point of the game is you think you beat the game, you beat the boss, and then all of a sudden the castle flips to an inverse castle upside down, and you have to basically do the game again, except upside down, but there's more harder bosses and enemies, and that's when you get the real ending. And that's what I want to play to. I want to see the inverted castle and stuff like that. I think the girl from Rondo, Maria, I think her name is in this game and shows up at some point. And I believe that's everything. Alright, so I'm going to move on now to my predictions. These are the things that I think will happen in Symphony of the Night. We'll see if they actually come to fruition. When I played through Resident Evil for the first time in that video, I predicted zombie super soldiers and it ended up being somewhat right, so we'll see if I end up right again with this. I believe Richter Belmont is mind-controlled by Dracula, and that's why he attacks Alucard. I don't think it's a superhero misunderstanding. Maria will want to get with Alucard romantically. There'll be a little bit of flirtation on her end, but Alucard will be like, no, I'm too focused on the mission. I have to kill my father, and be really mopey about it. But I feel like Maria will still want to kind of get with Alucard, you know? It's the 90s and it's Konami, so I feel like it'll be a similar like flirtation thing, like between Meryl and Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid. I think armor will be like Final Fantasy, where it will increase your stats but not necessarily affect anything cosmetically. I do think weapons will have a physical appearance as well as a gameplay change whenever you equip certain weapons. Alright, my ending predictions. Dracula will be vanquished by Alucard, Richter, and Maria teaming up, kind of like Sypha, Trevor, and Alucard do in the Netflix series, and there'll be a huge epic battle. Like, it'll be a big final boss, but I think you'll have help, or at least like a little 2D cutscene of them like assisting with the fight as well. I think would be really cool. I think the game will tease at the end Dracula's eventual return, maybe revealing a new character for next time in the next games in the series and stuff. And a personal prediction for me, I think I will die a lot at the beginning, but once I get the hang of like the weapons and armor system, how that works, and get a feel for exploring, I feel like it'll get better with time and I won't die as much later on. Alright, so before I go, I'm going to address that I am going to be playing the XBLA version on Xbox One via backwards compatibility, because that's just the easiest for me to record, and I'm lazy, so I'll do the easiest thing I can. The only thing I'll be missing out on is about 3 minutes of full motion video cutscenes, and I'll just end up watching them on YouTube later to make up for it, so not a total loss. And plus, I like this version because it has the original voice acting, which more than makes up for the fact that I'm going to be missing 3 minutes of cutscenes. So I'm going to go play the game. About, I don't know how long Symphony of the Night is, I'm actually kind of excited. So I'm going to play up until the castle becomes inverted, and then come back and give my thoughts on the game so far. This will probably be, I don't think this game will be as plot heavy, mostly gameplay mechanic heavy, so this will probably be a shorter video overall than the Resident Evil one, but I'm still excited to play this game for the first time. Alright, I'll be back. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, I'm back. I have spent about 6 or 7 or so hours with Symphony of the Night. It's really hard to tell because the in-game counter is, I believe it's a little bit off, but I have died quite a bit at the beginning of this game, so my progress was like resetting, so then I would go through areas quicker, so my game time was probably a little bit shorter. But the point is that I probably spent about 6 or 7 hours total with the game. I have freed Richter from Shaft's mind control and have begun exploring the inverted castle. I have actually tried to get to a save point, so I defeated the first boss you encounter. What's crazy is there's no CGI cutscenes in the Xbox Live Arcade version of the game, so right after you do the boss fight with Shaft, it is a hard cut, and then the castle's inverted. We need to go explore the castle, and Alucard's like, I'll find him, he's in there. So you're looking for Shaft, you're not looking for Dracula, so that's interesting, but I'll get more to that in a second. So what do I think of the game so far? This game is incredibly fun. It starts off strong by making you powerful during the prologue when you first control Alucard, killing the beast in one hit as you like use your sword and like those demon dogs just burst right into flames. It's such a good feeling being so powerful, and especially the boss fight at the beginning where you're like a supercharged Richter, you can do the slide and knock your way through candles and everything. You just feel really strong at the beginning of this game. So when that was taken away from you, it had a huge impact there. I was wondering how an RPG Metroidvania would play, since I've only played action-focused ones like Metroid, Arkham Asylum, and Axiom Verge. In terms of exploration, I actually prefer Symphony of the Night, since you can get to most places in the castle early on, so I don't have to spend an hour bombing walls just to get enough health power-ups to make it through the end game more easily. You earn health and heart power-ups in natural locations by like either finding them out in the open or solving like a little quick puzzle or defeating a boss or like one of the optional bosses that don't grant you any powers per se, but it's still a really fun fight and you get something out of it. So it's better than bombing walls in Metroid for an hour and a half just to get some really good power-ups so that you can make it through the end game without pulling your hair out. So I thought that was really nice. Progress is also gated somewhat by enemy difficulty. If you make it to the crypt underneath the castle underleveled, you're going to have a really bad time, and in that way it reminded me a bit of Breath of the Wild or a Souls game in that regard. Kind of like gating you by how difficult an enemy is versus do you have an item or not. Like you can, if you're very skilled, not like me, you can make your way through that area a lot easier. Either way, I thought that was neat. And speaking of combat is actually a lot of fun. It's really strategic in terms of which items to use in which location. Like if you're running into like flying enemies or Medusa heads, I like the dagger or the axe to throw and hit them. They're really good against the harpies and the clock tower especially, so like knowing which area you're in and which items to use is very strategic, and I really like that style of combat. So the dagger and holy water were my two favorites to use. The cross is great, but it takes up a lot of pots to use to be worth it during boss fights in my opinion. I was able to level up enough to where boss fights weren't terribly hard near the end of the first half of the game, so I didn't really need the cross, but just holy water, daggers, and my standard sword was pretty much all I needed to mow down bosses. Just having the ability to dodge adds a lot to 2D combat. I wish there was more weapon types, but it's still a lot of fun. This was the first of its type for Castlevania. It wrote the book on Metroid RPGs, so I can't be too mad. However, I'm never bored of the combat. Like, even though I'm just mainly using swords and the items, I'm still having a lot of fun. I did get lost a couple times. The first time I got lost was because when I found the shop in the library, I didn't know there would be an important item that I need to advance. I believe it's the necklace that opens the blue doors that was in the library. So I went there. I didn't know there'd be essential items in the library. If it told me that, I missed that completely, so I got lost for a little bit, had to go back to the library. The second time I got lost was before I found the mist ability. I stumbled into the alternate areas, the cavern and the crypt, and was frustrated that I didn't get the items from there. Eventually I found out about the clock room and was able to advance from there after going back to the library. It ultimately paid off because I got some health and heart power-ups thanks to some of the optional bosses, so I think even if I didn't get lost immediately, I'd be having a tougher time near the end, but the fact that I was able to explore those optional areas to get more powerful, it actually helped me, so I'm not mad at all. The visuals are great. I know it's remastered in this version, but even comparing it to the original sprite work, it still holds up. Probably the best looking PS1 game, looking at the original sprite work setting. Maybe second compared to Rayman 1. I don't know, I need to go back and look at that, but Rayman 1 really did some really cool 2D art for the PS1 era, so it just makes me wish there was more 2D games around that time, especially the Nintendo 64, but I'm getting way off topic. I won't go into that. My favorite bit so far was Alucard's nightmare sequence where he sees his mother being burnt at the stake. As a huge fan of the Netflix series, that moment was really cool to see, especially since it was kind of a dark twist on her saying that all of mankind should be punished for the deeds of these few, which is, and that was because it was actually a succubus who was using that memory to like mess with Alucard in a way, because in the Netflix series and as it's implied in this version, Alucard says his mother wouldn't want this at all, so it was really neat that I could tell along with Alucard that something was up, so it put me in the character's shoes having known a bit of the lore there, so I thought that was really fun. So yeah, I loved this moment, and man is that Netflix show really good. Alright, so I'm going to pull up that list I pulled up in the beginning. I'm going to go over what I was right and what I was wrong about before playing Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the first time. Obviously, this game plays differently compared to previous Castlevanias, and I was right about that. I was right about the beginning, where Alucard, Shaft, and Death stealing your weapons, because I did play that bit before. A little bit cheating, but still right. I still remembered from my college, so that's pretty good. I was right about Maria being in this game. I couldn't tell you where I got that info, probably just osmosis from being around games for so long, but I knew she was in Rondo, but I didn't know she was also in Symphony of the Night. I just remember hearing that somewhere, and I guess it stuck. One thing I was wrong about. I thought Shaft had already resurrected Dracula and that he was a mini-boss, but he hasn't even gotten to that part yet. Dracula is not really been mentioned. Shaft is the main person pulling the strings so far. So he reminds me a lot of Xant from Zelda Twilight Princess, how he was trying to freeze Ganon from the Sage's prison. He's also like the Darth Vader to Dracula's Emperor. He's the one like going around like actually pulling the strings. And Dracula, I imagine at the end of the game, once he's finally resurrected, is gonna be sitting there like, I have returned to do my evil deeds or whatever. I don't think he's gonna zap Alucard with lightning, but stranger things have happened. Alright, these are my predictions that I've got. Well, some right, some wrong so far. We'll see. Richter was not mind controlled by Dracula, but by Shaft. You had to find special glasses to free him. Good thing I explored a lot before going to Dracula's Keep. I saw like the stairs from like the beginning. Also, I played the original Castlevania, so I'm like, I imagine that's where the final boss is. I'm gonna go explore a lot more, open up a lot of this castle, and I'm glad I did. So I found those glasses that helped me out, because I wouldn't have been able to unlock the inverted castle without it, I assume. I was wrong about the romantic chemistry. That was kind of like a half guess, but there was not a lot of romantic chemistry between Alucard and Maria. I think she has 1 or 2 flirty lines, but nothing really comes of it. I thought it would be more like she would be flirting with him, and then he didn't want to focus on that. Like, not now. I got a mission to do. I gotta kill my father. Because Alucard's very emo in that way. I was wrong! The cape changes color. I was wrong about the Final Fantasy-esque armor system where you wouldn't actually see the armor change when you equip a new armor type. But what I really liked was that the cape changed colors. That's cool. I don't remember anything else quite changing colors. The fact that the cape did gave me some sense of progression. As like I was leveling up my armor, that it actually looked slightly different. And that's all I know so far based on my predictions. I'm still really hoping for an Alucard, Maria, and Richter team up at the end to fight Dracula, like a big epic boss battle in the vein of the final battle in Season 2 of the Castlevania series. I really want to see a game version of that. Maybe you'll just play as Alucard and the other two are just backing you up, but I just want to see them there for the final battle. Alright, that's everything so far. I will be back once I kill Dracula. Or Shaft. And stop the resurrection of Dracula. There'll be some killing of Dracula here. Alright, I'll be back in a bit. Alright, I am back. Dracula is defeated. The world is saved. And more importantly, I have finished Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The final boss essentially has 2 phases. You fight Shaft first, and then you fight Dracula. Once you kill Drac, Alucard, Richter, and Maria exit the castle safely, and in my ending, since I didn't explore enough of the castle, Alucard leaves alone. If you explore more of it, then Maria leaves with Alucard, which is interesting. I watched both endings. They don't really seem to affect much, except Maria going after Alucard. I don't know which one is the canonical one, but it's better than the ending in which you kill Richter in the first half of the castle. So overall, what did I think of the game? I absolutely loved exploring in the first half. The inverted castle was really cool at the start, but eventually it just devolves into scanning a lot of the areas, looking for armor upgrades by turning into a bat and just tracing the top of walls, looking for like hidden exits and everything, and to pad out your percentage. And after a while, the turning into a bat, just tracing walls, it kind of drags on a bit. From that point, I decided that I would just beeline the inverted castle and just focus on getting the Dracula relics at that point. The bosses in the first castle were more memorable. You have Richter, the succubus, and Death himself. The bosses in the inverted castle seemed like they were more of a power check, in that you would just find their weakness, just spam attack until eventually you beat them. The bosses didn't feel as strategic or memorable in the inverted castle compared to the first half, in my opinion. It may have just been because I was adjusting to the combat, but even so, like, I just wanted to get through the bosses just so I could beat the game at this point in the inverted castle. I still enjoyed the game, but most of the fun comes from exploring the first castle. The inverted castle feels more like a new game plus rather than the back half of a 15-hour game or so. Unlike the first Resident Evil, there wasn't a big change in gameplay from the first to the second half. So that's pretty much my thoughts on the inverted castle. It's the same gameplay, just with a little bit of a twist. There's a train. So now that we covered the gameplay, it's time to pull up that list again and figure out what else I got wrong about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. The last thing I didn't cover was actually the inverted castle itself. I thought the inverted castle would be the halfway point since it's two separate castles, but really it's more like a 75%, 25%, since there's less emphasis on finding items to progress and more on just finding the 5 Dracula relics to beat the final boss. Again, it feels more like a new game plus versus a second half of the game. You're still exploring the same space, but they really don't do there's no real puzzle involving that space. It'd be really cool if you had to go in the castle, since it was inverted, had to go through the same areas in reverse, but that would pad out the game length longer, and at this point, once you get to the inverted castle, you just want to fight Dracula. So I guess it makes sense from a pacing standpoint, but I think that would have been a cool way to kind of guide the player to those spaces. The charm of the inverted castle is the fact that it's an inverted castle. I'm sure it caught a lot of players off guard, but the fact that it's become so integrated in gaming popular culture, everyone who knows about Symphony of the Night knows about the inverted castle, whereas if you played it as a kid for the first time, I imagine it blew your mind. So a lot of the spectacle of the inverted castle is the fact that it's there in the first place, not necessarily the gameplay with it. At least that's my take on it. I got a little off track there, but I'm going to pull up the predictions list now that we got to the end, and all my predictions have been either proven or disproven at this point. I guess I was right about the Maria Alucard relationship, since she leaves with him at the end. Hard to tell if that read is romantic or not, but it's a bit odd. The fact that there was a kind of connection between the two of them. It was not really flirty, maybe a little bit, but then she decides to leave with him at the end. Not my ending, though. She just stayed, which made more sense, in my opinion, than her leaving with him. But to each their own. Everyone has their own interpretation. Maria and Richter did not show up to the final battle, sadly. It made for a more personal conflict, father versus son. But it would have been nice to see them actually do something rather than just show up and just say a little bit of exposition to Alucard and check up. They seem more like a checkpoint. Well, Maria seems more like a checkpoint where you're okay, you're going the right way, you're finding the right things you need to find, talk to me, I'll help you realize that Richter's not himself. They're not important to the grand scheme of the game itself, which I guess makes sense, because in a Metroidvania you kind of want to depend on yourself, but I think it would be really cool to have a final battle with all of them. There was no tease for Dracula's return. Everyone seems happy in the end. I know this is not the end of the timeline, because I think the Game Boy Advance games go into our future. I thought it was interesting that they didn't at least hint at it or tease, or maybe he's vanquished but we know he'll return someday, but I don't know. I thought there would be a tease. I thought they would love to be we want to sell more games, throw in a tease about Dracula in the end. Or if it's an implied thing, well, we know he'll be back. As for my personal prediction of dying a lot in the beginning and getting better, I died a lot in the middle of the first castle, actually. Not so much at the beginning, not so much near the end of my run. It was mainly figuring out where to go after the library. Once I found the correct path, I was fine. I mainly got lost after the library, trying to figure out the main path where to go. I ended up in the catacombs and the underground labyrinth, which it helped me out in the long run, but I did die a lot trying to figure out where to go there. Okay, now it's time to wrap up. So, I just want to clarify, I really had fun with this game. The first castle is some of the best exploring ever I played in a Metroidvania. The story's serviceable, it's a fun, cheesy romp, especially with that voice acting. This is one of the better Metroidvanias I played, maybe second to Metroid Zero Mission. I think Metroid Zero Mission is still my personal favorite. It's my first big 2D Metroidvania game I played. I played that on emulation only a couple years ago at this point, and it kind of got me into 2D Metroidvania. Since then I played Axiom Verge, Metroid Fusion, which is also really good, Symphony of the Night, and there may have been a couple more that I just can't place at the moment. I want to go back and play the older games before moving forward, so I My next Castlevania pickup will probably be the Castlevania collection, and Lords of Shadow is going to be free this month. I really want to check out Lords of Shadow because I heard the story was actually pretty good. I heard it goes bonkers in the second one, and people don't really like it as much, but I don't know, the fact that it goes full on stupid in the second one actually has me more interested to check it out. So we'll see. They're all backwards compatible, so I'm gonna check that out for sure. I'm definitely gonna get Castlevania Collection on my Switch though. I really want to play the Game Boy games just because Belmont's Revenge is just a cool title. I'm vain, I know. So if you like the series, what other classic games should I experience for the first time? I mostly played licensed games growing up, like some of the Disney games on Genesis and a lot of the movie games and movies I like. So those were most of the types of games I played. If I knew I liked it, I would play it. I didn't want to take a risk on a property like that I'd never heard of before. So I played a lot of Dragon Ball Z games back then. It wasn't until like the 360 came out was when I started to experiment more with games that were actually prestigious versus games that I just knew the property. Again, I got sidetracked. Let me know what you thought of this format. If you're new to the channel, give some of the older stuff a look. And as always, subscribe, hit the bell, you know what to do. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. I do not know how to end these.